Greetings and welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. I have quite a bit I'm trying to get in tonight, so I'm going to just jump in. But first, I'm going to fix my lighting slightly better. Starting off with some political / climate change news, but here's one for some major irony, if you will. This is from the News Broadcast Network. I don't know who or where this website is from, but we'll assume this is real news, quote unquote. The U.S. military now has the money it needs to prepare for climate change. This is from Jim Staub, August 15th. On Monday, President Trump signed into law the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2019. The $716 billion military spending bill funds the military's operations, everything from the nation's nuclear weapons programs to a pay raise for troops. Is this getting closer to $1 trillion a year? That is just amazing. It also includes funds to help the military prepare for climate change. The military spending bill splits its focus on climate change across two areas. The first involves preparing the military's installations for climate change. According to the bill, the military must create special mitigation plans for any new installations that could be affected by floods. It must also incorporate the National Academies of Sciences climate change research into any plans to design new buildings or modify older ones. My. The bill also expands the military's authority to improve critical roads on the outskirts of bases that a rise in sea level or recurrent flooding could render impassable. The second area involves preparing the military to deal with consequences of Arctic ice melt. As this ice melts and traffic in the region increases, security issues could arise as nations compete to exploit newly accessible resources. Won't that be fun? So the bill provides funding to update the U.S.'s Arctic strategy to include any new security threats. Permafrost thaw has already damaged one munitions maintenance facility in Alaska. The bill includes funding to replace that and assess the potential for future damage caused by permafrost thaw. While President Trump didn't mention climate change while signing the National Defense Authorization Act into law on Monday, the fact that he did sign it means that at least some of the country's infrastructure will be prepared for climate change. Very interesting. Lo and behold. I really don't know what to say about that. Just ridiculous. Also, this is from today. Australia, climate change naysayer Scott Morrison becomes Prime Minister. In Australia, Conservative Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has been ousted after a bruising leadership fight within the ruling Liberal Party. Treasurer Scott Morrison will replace Turnbull as the country's newest prime minister. Morrison is a social conservative who, like Turnbull, is known for his support for Australia's harsh anti-immigrant policies. He's also a prominent opponent of efforts to curb catastrophic climate change. In 2017, Morrison brought a lump of coal to the floor of Parliament, mocking opposition lawmakers with the words, "Don't be afraid, don't be scared, it won't hurt you, it's coal." Scott Morrison becomes prime minister as human-induced global warming has brought soaring temperatures and wildfires to Australia, along with the continent's worst drought in living memory. Awesome. That'll be helpful, I'm sure, to Australians and the world. From Axios, global heat wave animation shows records broken in 2018. The summer of 2018 has been noteworthy for the all-time heat records smashed around the world, from California to Sweden and Japan. Why it matters. The heat is a sign of a warming trend, scientists have said, with human-caused global warming raising the odds of heat waves as well as increasing their severity and duration. This visualization above shows the high temperature records set from May 1st through July 31st, as compiled by Berkeley Earth, a nonprofit group that monitors global temperatures. Axios plotted daily record highs, monthly record highs, and all-time record highs. We did not include record lows because only daily record lows were made available. However, according to the National Centers for Environmental Information, warm temperature records have been significantly outpacing cold ones, including monthly and all-time cold records worldwide so far this year. This was especially the case this summer. By the numbers, some of the records represented by the dots on the map include Norway set a new national maximum temperature record when temperatures soared to 33.5 C or 92.3 Fahrenheit on July 17th in Bardufoss. Norway also set a new warm national minimum temperature when it dropped to only 25.2 C or 77.4 Fahrenheit on July 18th. Unbelievable. Warmer than average temperatures engulfed much of Sweden during July 2018, with several locations setting new monthly temperature records. Montreal, Canada also set its all-time high temperature record during a deadly Quebec heat wave in early July. California set its record for warmest July on record, while Death Valley set a record for the hottest month ever recorded on Earth. Japan set a national temperature record of 106 Fahrenheit with 41.1 C in a heat wave that followed deadly floods. By the way, because Japan is getting hit again by yet another typhoon. And maybe I'll dip into that for a second. In the Middle East, Kiryat Oman likely set the world's hottest low temperature ever recorded on June 28th when it failed to drop below 109 Fahrenheit, 42.8 C. What does it all mean? Let's go to that typhoon real quick. I think there were actually 2 typhoons that hit Japan this week, if I'm not mistaken. Typhoon, this is from today. Typhoon Cimaron passed through Western Japan to the Sea of Japan early Friday, leaving at least 13 people injured and disrupting traffic before being downgraded to an extratropical cyclone off northeastern Japan in the afternoon. Downpours caused power outages affecting about 138,000 households in central and western Japan and grounded 60 flights to and from Osaka and Aichi prefectures Friday morning. The weather agency urged people to remain on alert as further rain gusts and landslides are likely even in areas it has already passed and are also expected in northern Japan as the typhoon turned low pressure system and an ensuing typhoon approached the area. After making landfall on the main island of Shikoku on Thursday night, Cimaron caused the Kumano River to overflow in Wakayama Prefecture. The Japan Meteorological Agency earlier reported that rainfall of 136 millimeters per hour was reported at Kobe Airport, but later retracted the data, saying that the figure is likely to have been affected by wave splash. At least 13 people were injured after falling due to strong winds, according to the Fire and Disaster Management Agency in Hyogo Prefecture. A total of 5 vehicles, including a truck, were overturned by gusts on the Akashi Kaikyo Bridge, which connects the main island of Honshu and Awaji Island, and 3 people were hospitalized. At a park on Awaji commemorating a magnitude 7.3 earthquake that devastated the area and its vicinity in 1995, a wind turbine about 60 meters tall generating electricity for the facility was found toppled on Friday morning. In the city of Nishinomiya, also in Hyogo, the roof of an apartment building was blown off and part of it fell on the parking area below early Friday. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said in a meeting at the disaster response headquarters on Friday morning, heavy rain is expected to continue, including in areas the typhoon has already passed. I request further vigilance against rising rivers and mudslides. As of 3 p.m., Sulik was traveling northeast in the Sea of Japan at a speed of 35 kilometers per hour. It was packing winds of up to 126 kilometers per hour with an atmospheric pressure of 986 hectopascals at its center. In the 24-hour period through Saturday morning, 150 millimeters of rain is expected in the central Japan region of Tokai and Hokkaido. Wow. Good Lord. How is Japan just not reeling from all of this mayhem they're enduring? I don't know. All right, had to touch on this one. Interesting climate manipulation or manufacturing story. This is from the Telegraph. Mexican farmers claim Volkswagen hail cannons caused drought. Mexican farming communities accused German auto giant Volkswagen on Tuesday of arbitrarily provoking a drought in the central state of Puebla to protect its newly manufactured cars from hail. Volkswagen, which has a major plant in Puebla, has been using hail cannons, sonic devices that purport to disrupt the formation of hail in the atmosphere to disperse storm clouds, menacing the thousands of new cars parked on its lots. This is just insane. Farmers in Cuatlanquingo, the rural municipality where the plant is located, say the controversial technique is causing a drought that has made them lose 2,000 hectares of crops. Scientists are skeptical over whether hail cannons actually work. But local farmers say the cannons work so well they have dispersed not only hailstorms, but all the precipitation since May, what is supposed to be the start of the rainy season. The farmers are reportedly seeking more than 70 million pesos, which is $4 million in compensation from the automaker. Volkswagen tried to defuse the conflict this week by announcing it was taking the cannons off automatic mode and would only fire them when potential hailstorms approached. So yes, it's happening, and they're admitting it. Good God, it's insane. This is insane. It also pledged to invest in protective mesh to serve as its first line of defense against hail. So if something can be used for, such a frivolous, the weather is being manipulated for such a frivolous thing like keeping hail off of cars. Golly gee whiz, what could they be doing on a major level? Who knows? I don't know. It's all speculation, but I'm just saying. That only added to the fury of local farmers and officials who have been protesting against the automaker. It is unacceptable that they continue using this device, even in manual mode. They are not respecting their neighbors' request to definitively stop using hail cannons. They are acting arbitrarily, said Rafael Ramirez, the top local environmental official. I mean, this is the fallout from. This is just more industrial civilization, like run wild, right? We gotta change the weather because we don't want our cars destroyed by hail. And damn the consequences. Company can take other measures to protect its cars, but people here can't live off anything but their land. Volkswagen claims to be an environmentally friendly company. Ha ha ha. The company that cheated falsified emissions. Yes. Gerardo Perez, a leader of the farmers who have been protesting against Volkswagen, said the hail cannons are affecting the Earth's cycles. When they emit their sonic booms, the sky literally clears and it simply doesn't rain. That is bizarre. It is not the first environmental controversy for the car maker, which is still dealing with the fallout of an emissions cheating scandal that erupted in 2015. Volkswagen Mexico officials did not immediately answer requests for comment. The company has responded in the past that it has all necessary permits from Puebla state officials to operate the devices. So just because it is legal does not mean that it is right. Volkswagen launched operations in Mexico in 1965. The Puebla plant is its largest in the world outside of Germany. It produces more than 450,000 vehicles a year. That is ginormous. And operates around the clock, employing some 15,000 people. 500,000 cars a year. That's disgusting. And that's just one automaker. And that's just one plant. That is disgusting. Moving on to something from The Monthly. This is by James Bradley. The End of the Oceans. The world's oceans and all marine life are on the brink of total collapse. In June this year, scientists from the University of Tasmania and the University of Technology, Sydney, published research showing that over the past decade, the biomass of large fish in Australian waters has declined by more than a third. The results may have jarred with government claims of Australian fisheries being among the most sustainable in the world, but they closely matched official figures showing a 32% decline in Australian fishery catches in the same period. The declines were sharpest in species targeted for fishing and areas in which fishing is permitted, but even populations of species not exploited by fishing declined across the same period. The notion that a third of large fish in Australian waters disappeared in just 10 years should be of profound concern to all. The health of marine food webs depends on healthy populations of the predator species that regulate populations of smaller species. Declines in their numbers are likely to lead to hastening disruption of ocean ecosystems. Even more disturbingly, these falls mirror similar declines in marine life around the world. According to a 2015 report by the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, populations of marine vertebrates, including fish, turtles, birds, whales, dolphins, and seals, fell by half between 1970 and 2010. And although the drops in numbers were most extreme during the 1970s and early 1980s, in recent years they have accelerated again, suggesting a similar study conducted today would find an even greater rate of decline. And in a separate study in the United Nations found that although demand for fish is still rising, almost 90% of the world's fisheries are fully fished or overfished. There is no question these headline figures disguise considerable variation between species and regions. The study of Australian fisheries found that biomass of exploited species actually increased in areas where they were protected for fishing. Really? But that should not divert our attention from the fact that declines were worst in those species humans rely upon for food. Really? A WWF study found populations of tuna, mackerel, and bonito dropped by 74% in the same period. 74%. Or what other studies estimate the populations of large species such as whales, dolphins, sharks, seals, rays, and turtles have declined by more than 75% on average, with some species such as right whales, leatherback turtles, and blue whales declining by 90% or more. Half of all marine vertebrates gone in 40 years. A third of large fish in Australian waters gone in the past decade. 90% of the world's fisheries already at their limits or beyond. These figures speak to a reality few want to acknowledge, and the decline is made even more shocking by the fact that it has taken place so rapidly. As Ilko Rolling professor of ocean and climate change at the Australian National University, points out, although there is evidence that hominids were traveling by boat more than 50,000 years ago, and middens and other archaeological evidence make it clear we have relied upon the ocean for even longer, marine environments remained largely pristine until fewer than 500 years ago. In fact, they only really began changing in the early 1800s. While we were still sailing around in wooden ships powered by the wind, humans didn't really have much of an influence. The real change comes with industrialization and the power to move ourselves around with steam and other technologies. Once that happens, you begin to see mass whaling and fishing on scales that were unimaginable beforehand. It is difficult for us to imagine the oceans before humans transformed them and how they teemed with life. In Anna Clark's History of Fishing in Australia, The Catch, she describes the fishing Eden that greeted early Europeans. The seafloor off the west coast of Tasmania carpeted red with crayfish, fish so thick that nets could be set at any time of the day, an astonishing magnitude of Australian salmon, mountains of mullet that migrated annually up the east coast. This accords with James Cook's and Joseph Banks' description of the density of marine life they found in Botany Bay, where the crew speared stingrays weighing as much as 152 kilograms and reported catching about 300 pounds weight of fish in just 3 or 4 hauls of the net. In Tasmania, whales congregated in the Derwent River, in such numbers that they were a hazard to shipping. While on the other side of the globe, off the coast of Cornwall, a shoal of sardines was spotted in 1836 that stretched for well over 100 kilometers. Today, there are approximately 90,000 nesting female green turtles left worldwide. But studies suggest that when Europeans arrived in the Americas, there were more than 50 million in the Caribbean alone. Reports describe them filling the ocean from horizon to horizon as they grazed upon the seagrass that surrounded the Cayman Islands. As late as the 18th century, ships en route to the Caymans could navigate through the darkness by the sound of the turtles' shells knocking together as they fed. Further back again, the Roman writer Oppian describes a Mediterranean so full of fish it was possible to catch tuna by simply dropping a log with a spike on it into the water. More often than not, these descriptions of astonishing abundance were merely the prelude to their destruction. Despite indigenous Australians having fished along coastlines for tens of thousands of years without adverse effect, Australian fisheries began to collapse within a few generations of European colonization. The bays around Sydney were denuded of oysters by the 1860s. By 1880, Sydney Harbour, once brimming with fish, was described as scarcely a source of supply at all. And by the 1920s, stocks of Sydney's tiger flathead had collapsed due to the introduction of ocean trawling. The decline in numbers also brought reductions in size, as fish were caught and killed before they could reach adulthood. Where once sturgeon up to 5 meters long were common in the bays and estuaries of North America, now they are gone. While the immense rays that glided across the sandy bottom of Botany Bay in Cook and Banks's time would be exceptional today, even Oppian's teeming Mediterranean is now so devoid of fish that many marine biologists call it the Deaditerranean. Yet for sheer focused ferocity, little compares to the carnage wrought upon marine mammals by whalers and sealers. Scientists estimate at least 3 million whales were wiped out in the 20th century alone, a massacre that peaked in the 1960s and killed more than 2/3 of the global population of sperm whales and 90% of blue whales, as well as bringing northern right whales, so known because their placid nature and tendency to float after death made them the right whale to kill, to the brink of extinction. Seals were also killed in the millions. In his classic book, Sea of Slaughter, Canadian writer Farley Mowat calculates at least 13 million seals were killed between 1830 and 1860. 13 million. In Newfoundland alone. While in the early years of the 19th century, populations of southern fur seals on sub-Antarctic islands were reduced from between 1 and 2 million to a mere few hundred in just a few decades. It is difficult not to recoil from these sorts of statistics. The violence and cruelty they speak of, They speak to horrified even observers of the era, and in a time when we are increasingly aware that other animals think and feel and even grieve, the idea of this sort of slaughter is almost unbearable. Yet such exploitation is only one symptom of a much larger crisis overtaking marine environments, a perfect storm of pressures that is altering the oceans in profound and often irreversible ways. The magnitude of this transformation is difficult to comprehend. Making sense of it demands we grapple with its terrifying scale and rapidity in geological terms. But more deeply, it demands that we recognize not just the complexity and interconnectedness of the forces that shape life on Earth, but also the degree to which we are all implicated in what is taking place. 200 kilometers to the east of the Philippines, the ocean floor drops vertiginously, thank you, into the Mariana Trench, a vast crescent-shaped scar in the Earth's surface, more than 2,500 kilometers long, and averaging some 70 kilometers in width. Its deepest point, the Challenger Deep, a small slot-shaped valley at its southern end, lies 11 kilometers beneath the surface, testament to the violence of the forces that drive the Earth's drifting continental plates. It is once believed to be evidence of the now discredited theory that the Pacific Basin is the wound left when the moon's matter was ripped free of the Earth by centrifugal force. The depth of the Mariana Trench makes it impossibly hostile to surface-dwelling life. Water pressure is more than 1,000 times that at sea level, and temperatures rarely rise above 4 degrees Celsius. Humans have been there only 4 times. Yet in May of this year, researchers from Japan's Global Oceanographic Data Center found a plastic bag at its bottom. This bag has the dubious distinction of being the deepest known piece of plastic waste, yet is only one of thousands of pieces of rubbish cataloged in the center's deep sea debris database, which also includes fishing nets, tires, washing machines, bottles, tins, sneakers, even a gym bag. Of these items, more than 33% are plastic, and 89% of those are single-use products such as plastic bottles and utensils, ratios that increase to 52% and 92% at depths of more than 6 kilometers. Until recently, public concern about marine pollution was primarily focused on oil spills and their catastrophic effect on seabirds and coastal environments. These mostly used to come from tankers. 1989's Exxon Valdez disaster released more than 40 million liters of crude oil across 28,000 square miles of ocean and 2,100 kilometers of coastline. But as demand has pushed global oil production even higher and technology has allowed fossil fuel companies to drill in waters that only a few decades ago would have been regarded as impossibly deep, the number of spills from pipelines and drilling has increased fourfold. This convergence of growing technological capability and increased risk underpins public resistance to recent attempts to open the relatively pristine waters of the Great Australian Bight to exploration and drilling. As is often the case, though, this is only part of the story. While the short-term effects of oil spills are often catastrophic, the Exxon Valdez, or Valdez, however you want to. I hear people pronounce it Valdez all the time. I don't know why. Disaster killed hundreds of thousands of seabirds, thousands of otters, large numbers of seals, dolphins, and orcas, and countless fish and invertebrates, as well as causing long-term damage to the area's ecosystems. The amount of oil released by spills is barely a third of the amount that enters marine environments as runoff from human activities on land, shipping discharges, and use of fossil fuels. In recent years, however, concern about oil spills has been overtaken by growing alarm about the impact of plastic upon marine environments. Humans have produced 8.3 billion tons of plastic since mass production of it began in the early 1950s, a figure that continues to rise vertiginously year by year. A staggering 335 million metric tons is estimated to have been created in 2016 alone. Able to be produced so cheaply that recycling is rarely economic, most plastic ends up in incinerators and landfill. The rest leaks out into the environment, with at least 8 million tons a year washing into the oceans. Jennifer Lavers, a marine biologist at the University of Tasmania, recently made the scale of the problem graphically clear. In 2015, Lavers and 6 others traveled to Henderson Island in the South Pacific to conduct preliminary work on a program to eradicate rats introduced by Polynesians almost 1,000 years ago. Henderson Island is roughly midway between New Zealand and South America. Save for the 50 people living on the Pitcairn Island, some 200 kilometers to the southwest, one must travel almost 700 kilometers west to the Gambier Islands before encountering human habitation. To the east, there is nothing but Easter Island, almost 2,000 kilometers away. Prior to this year, Henderson was principally famous as a footnote to literary history. In 1820, Captain George Pollard and what was left of his crew made landfall on the island after their ship, the Essex, was rammed and sunk by a sperm whale. 30 years later, their story would help inspire Moby Dick. Lavers has been studying plastic pollution for much of her career, yet what she saw when she arrived on Henderson Island shocked even her. I know plastic is ubiquitous. It's found from the Arctic to the Antarctic and everywhere in between, so I don't go anywhere without expecting to find it. Yet every now and then I arrive somewhere, I'm caught off guard. Henderson is one of the most remote islands in the world. It's one of only a handful of raised coral atolls in the world. It's World Heritage listed. It's surrounded by one of the largest marine protected areas in the world, and yet there, laid out in front of me, was a concentration of plastic unlike anything I'd ever seen. Lavers and her team calculated that there were 17.6 tons of plastic littering Henderson's beaches, with an average of more than 670 individual pieces per square meter. Of this, most was lying on the surface or buried in the first 10 centimeters of sand, and these amounts were increasing all the time. A survey of a 10-meter stretch of the island's North Beach found new pieces of plastic washing up every day. Yet, as Lavers pointed out, 17.6 tons of plastic she and her team found on Henderson constitutes less than 2 seconds of the annual global production of plastic, and only a tiny proportion of the estimated 5 trillion pieces of plastic believed to be floating in the ocean. One does not have to look far for examples of the toll plastic exacts upon ocean wildlife. Birds, fish, whales, and other marine animals are all vulnerable to entanglement. Likewise, studies of turtles, seals, dolphins, and birds suggest tens of thousands perish every year from swallowing plastics. On Midway Atoll in the North Pacific, up to a third of albatross chicks die every year, many of them starving to death after being fed plastic refuse that their parents have mistaken for food. American photographer Chris Jordan's images of their bedraggled corpses, rotting bellies distended with plastic caps and other refuse provide a mutely eloquent testament to the effects of this process. The plastics also pose a more insidious threat. Once adrift in the ocean, they begin to break down, dissolving into what is known as microplastics, tiny fragments ranging in size from millimeters to nanometers. The highest concentrations of these microplastics are found in the ocean's gyres, or gyres, vast circulating currents created by the Earth's rotation that act like huge vortices, drawing waterborne objects toward their centers. The best known of these gyres is in the North Pacific, and at its center lies the now infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Located midway between Hawaii and North America, the patch covers approximately 1.6 million square kilometers, or twice the size of New South Wales, with concentrations of plastic pollution reaching 100 kilograms per square kilometer at its center. But while the Great Pacific Garbage Patch has received the most attention, it is not alone. As Labor's experience on Henderson demonstrates, high concentrations of plastic pollution are also to be found at the center of the South Pacific Gyre, as well as those in the North and South Atlantic, while new research by Labor's and others suggests the Indian Ocean Gyre may actually be more polluted than the Pacific's. Along with the tiny beads of plastic deliberately added to products such as face scrubs and toothpaste, and the billions of tiny filaments produced by artificial fibers, these microplastics have invaded the ocean's food chain, gathering in higher and higher concentrations as one moves upward through the layers of predation. In the Eastern Pacific, microplastics are now ubiquitous in the host of species of tiny free-swimming or floating animals known as zooplankton, or zooplankton. These creatures fill the ocean's waters and act as a foundation of the ocean's ecosystems. In some parts of the ocean, there is now more plankton-sized plastic than plankton. meaning organisms that rely on plankton for food, such as whales, are consuming it in extremely large quantities. The long-term effects of this are not yet fully understood, but there is no doubt ocean microplastics are also being consumed by humans. Studies have detected them in fresh and tinned fish, while a study published earlier this year found that mussels in Britain contained up to 700 pieces of microplastic per kilogram, and other studies have found them in both fish and sea salt. While a study in California found a fifth of fish in local markets contained fibers from artificial fabrics. One study found a single load of polyester or acrylic clothing can release more than 500,000 microfibers. Their prevalence is made even more disturbing by the seawater, or by the growing evidence that microplastics absorb pollutants such as DDT from seawater, as well as organic molecules such as orestradiol, which is used for birth control. Other studies have found that microplastics contain high levels of chemicals that are known to disrupt the endocrine system and affect reproduction in many species. Plastic pollution is far from the only form of ocean pollution. ILCO rolling from ANU, for instance, points to largely unreported threat of polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. Originally used in the 1920s for cooling and insulation, PCBs were quickly incorporated into paints, adhesives, and the PVC coating on electrical wires and many other products. While the widespread use meant large quantities were released into the environment, it is not until the mid-1960s that Søren Jensen, a Danish scientist looking for evidence of DDT in fish, found traces of PCBs in pike caught in Sweden. Over the next 2 years, he found traces of them everywhere, in fish and birds, and even in the hair of his wife and daughter. In the years since Jensen's discovery, PCBs have been banned or regulated in many countries, but PCBs have not gone away. Quite the opposite. Studies show PCBs have permeated marine environments around the world, so much so that one recent study found high concentrations of them in the bodies of shrimp-like crustaceans called amphipods, living almost 10 kilometers beneath the ocean surface. The presence of PCBs in the ocean is extremely concerning. Highly toxic at even small doses, that cause cancer, liver damage, reproductive problems, and deformities in many species, including humans, as well as disturb hormonal balances in fish, birds, and mammals, and cause neurological disorders in birds. Because they collect in fatty tissues, they also become more concentrated as they move up the food chain, meaning they accumulate in the bodies of long-lived, high-level predators such as sharks, seals, and cetaceans. The long-term effects of this are not yet fully understood, but they may well be significant. PCBs have already been implicated in mass die-offs of certain populations of dolphins and are known to result in increased infant mortality in whales and dolphins who transfer high concentrations of them to their young in their milk. Worse yet, PCBs break down extremely slowly when kept out of sunlight, meaning they can linger in the deep ocean and in bodies of animals and fish for decades or even longer. Their continued presence, a reminder of the way the effects of our actions persist. That's a loud helicopter. And this is a really long article. I don't think I can actually even read this whole thing. I've already run out of time, guys. Because I'm already at 40 minutes. And I've got another, at least 10 minutes of reading. Well, I think you guys get the idea, but maybe I'm going to read. Read one more section, and I'm going to leave the rest for y'all. I'm going to link this below, and you guys can check this out. The threat posed by plastics, PCBs, and other forms of marine pollution may be immense. Hold on one second. Let's go down to the bottom and see what they're saying. I feel like I need to read this whole thing. Sorry, I'm just going through a little. Decisions. There's a lot of helicopter action in my life lately. I don't know what it is. I think the men in black are watching me. Anyways, now I just lost my place. The threat posed by plastic PCBs and other forms of marine pollution may be immense, but it pales into insignificance against that of climate change, something that was made heartbreakingly clear in 2016 and 2017 when the Great Barrier Reef suffered devastating back-to-back bleaching events that killed almost half of its coral. Coral bleaching occurs when rising temperatures cause coral polyps to expel the colorful algae they secrete in their bodies. Because the polyps, tiny animals that exist in a symbiotic relationship with the algae, rely upon the algae for food, bleached corals quickly starve or succumb to disease. With the coral gone, the reef ecosystems collapse, the teeming communities of fish and other organisms giving way to the algae-coated skeletons of dead coral. Only 40 years ago, coral bleaching was almost unknown. But in the 1980s, researchers began to observe bleaching events on the reefs in the Pacific and the Caribbean. At first, these events were geographically confined and, in the Pacific at least, associated with elevated sea temperatures produced by El Nino events. Then in 1998, unusually warm waters triggered mass bleaching events on reefs around the globe, killing 16% of the world's coral. 16%. The pattern was repeated when mass bleaching struck the Great Barrier Reef in 2002, but this time with a frightening new twist. Whereas the elevated sea temperatures of 1998 had been produced by the intense El Nino of 1997 and 98, compounding the background warming associated with climate change. In 2002, there was no El Nino. The water was just hot. In the decade and a half since 2002, rising ocean temperatures have led to more frequent bleaching on reefs around the world, yet the events of 2016 and 2017 were exceptional in both scale and severity, and suggested we have entered a new and critical phase in the transformation of marine environments. In previous bleaching events, there tended to be what James Carey, a researcher at the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University, that name is a mouthful, and a coordinator of the National Coral Bleaching Task Force, calls a spectrum of winners and losers, meaning some corals, mostly the less structurally complex varieties, fared better than others. But in 2016 especially, temperatures were so high that even the really hardy corals became losers. Carey explains that we have categories we use to assess the level of bleaching, the highest of which is category 4, which means 60% or more of the coral is bleached. But after 2016, we really need a category 5 for reefs that are 80 or 100% bleached. For Carey and many other scientists who work on the Great Barrier Reef, the events of 2016-17 were deeply upsetting. Describing his first sight of the damage, he hesitates. We had one day in a helicopter when we flew for 8 hours, and of the 500 reefs we surveyed, only 3 weren't bleached, which meant you were flying for hundreds of kilometers and every reef you saw was white. That was really difficult. The situation is being repeated around the world. In the Maldives, up to 90% of reefs bleached in 2016-17. Elsewhere in the Indian Ocean, reefs in Kenya, Sri Lanka, and along Australia's west coast all suffered extensive damage, with up to 90% of shallow water corals affected. Reefs in the Caribbean have been badly damaged, losing up to 80% of hard coral cover since the 1970s. While in Florida, one survey found up to 2/3 of the coral had died. For Ove Ho Goldberg, professor of marine science at the University of Queensland and coordinating lead author on the Oceans chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fifth Assessment Report, the events of 2016-17 were not a surprise. In 1998, Hugh Goldberg, or Ho Goldberg, I don't know, not sure about the pronunciation, published a paper predicting the disappearance of most warm water corals and the reefs they build by the middle of the century. At the time, his predictions were dismissed as alarmist. Today, they look conservative. We underestimated how quickly the changes would occur. 2 decades ago, we predicted back-to-back bleaching events by mid-century. They're happening right now. Given time, reefs can recover, recolonize from other reefs or deeper, cooler water, but this process is slow. Even fast-growing corals require 10 to 15 years to regrow, while others can take decades. In a warming world, that is not time they are likely to get, as Carey makes clear. Year on year, there are 30% chance that each year will be hotter than the year before. So the chances of getting another bleaching event are very high. The chances that those corals will reach adulthood without experiencing a serious bleaching event is very low. That means the problem isn't that the reef doesn't have the capacity to regenerate, but that it will keep getting knocked down by these big events. Looking ahead, that's the most likely scenario. Hugh Goldberg's assessment is even starker. Without decisive action on climate change, he foresees bleaching events becoming an annual occurrence within a decade or two. If we don't rapidly put the brakes on emissions, coral reefs as we know them will disappear by 2025 or 2030. And it goes on. That is all I'm going to read in this article, because this has gone on for a long time, and I'm going to spend like the next hour trying to upload this video. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. I'm going to link all of these articles in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for your links. All of these links and articles were contributed by viewers, and I appreciate y'all. If you want to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.